This webinar on AI in operational excellence, trends, strategies, and best practice. I'm Finco Serena, an associate professor in industrial plants and logistics at the University of Padova, and today I will be the moderator of this webinar. It's a great pleasure to me to be here today with these great panelists. And before starting, I leave the floor to Giuliano Marodin, which is the president of the POMS College of Operational Excellence. So the floor is yours, Giuliano.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Giuliano Marodin from University of South Carolina. I'm the president of the POMS College of Operational Excellence. So POMS is the top organization, academic organization in the field. And we are still the coolest college there. So it's divided into areas. And our college focused on operational excellence. So I'm going to share a little presentation here. That talks about a little bit about our college. So first, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for the panelists. Oops, I'm just going to put in this mode. That are here with us today. So we have this awesome group of academics that are going to talk about AI in operational excellence. We had other webinars that we did in the past. So I am still sharing. Oh. Okay. So we have this awesome other panels and webinars that we did in the past. You guys can take a look at that on the website, and then later on in this YouTube, we're going to post all the links for the webinar as well. First, I want to thank all the team on the College of Operational Excellence. So I'm the president. We have Richard, Serena, Matthias, Urian, and John also part of our team, and also thank all our board members for all their great work in helping the whole college. Now, also couldn't be here without our sponsors. So thank you very much for our sponsors. I'm going to say their name because they give us money for that. So Shingo Institute, The Ohio State, University of South Carolina, Morse Team, University of Illinois, Lean Enterprise Institute, TCU, University of Technology of Chemnitz, Catalysis, University of Kentucky, COE Business School, Penn State, and ETH Zurich. Thank you guys very much for your support. One other thing that we do in our college is our mini conference. So inside POMS annual conference, the mini conference is on the Thursday before the event. So if you haven't registered there yet or don't know which college to participate, we have our awesome agenda that include presentation from President of POMS, some finalists, awards, and lunch at a beautiful place near the river there in Reno, and a guided tour to the Automobile Museum. They have hundreds of cars, and they're going to give us a special tour there. So that's an awesome event that we organize as well, and you can see some pictures there of us having fun. If you're not, please follow our LinkedIn page. That's also how we kind of talk about those webinars and events, and kind of put the news of things going on there in our college. So we kind of started a year and a half ago and grew from 600, 700 people there. So yeah, please follow us there. And don't want to talk too much because we want to listen this group of amazing panelists there. So thank you guys very much for accepting that. Thank you, Serena, for doing that moderation as well. And then I'm going to give it back to you and let you guys share your knowledge. Thank you.
So thank you, Giuliano. Okay, so let me just introduce the topic. So AI nowadays is a very hot topic and is changing the world. And it's changing a lot of also the operational excellence. In particular, a lot of papers have been published in the last couple of years by speaking about the use of AI in, for example, forecasting, supply chain, logistics, scheduling, control, quality, and maintenance. So there are a lot of also of empirical evidence that demonstrate that AI actively can improve the operational excellence. But on the other hand, by a real point of view, the company nowadays are starting to introduce the AI in the operation, but there are a lot of barriers, and in particular technical barriers, but also organizational, cultural, and managerial. So I'm honored to be here today to moderate this session, and in particular, I'm honored to explore a lot of aspects with these great panelists. And in particular, I want to thank Matthias always, which is a professor from SAID Business School at Oxford, and Nada Sander, which is a distinguished professor at Northeast University, Professor Alexander Brittrom, full professor in digital manufacturing at Cambridge University, and finally, thanks to Thor, full professor of operational management at ETH Zurich. So, before starting and before going into detail on these specific areas, I want to ask you in a couple of sentences, how is AI changing operations? And with just a concrete example. So I think we can start with Nada.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, wherever you are. And it is AI is tremendously changing operations. And I personally think right now, the biggest shift that I'm seeing is moving away from a better tool to what I'm seeing is really a shift in the entire decision architecture. And let me explain. Last few years, we had talked a lot about AI as an advisory, but we are seeing now AI moving into increasingly autonomous and semi-autonomous roles, hopefully with guardrails, but now it can sense, it can analyze, it can decide, it can actually trigger decisions and complete the entire decision loop. So what does this mean? It compresses the decision loop. It is always on, unlike the cycle times that we see in forecasting and planning. And, I can give many concrete examples, but one that has kind of really stood to mind is this partnership that was announced now between Siemens and NVIDIA. 2026, they're hoping to accomplish this by 2030, which is not very far down the road. And what is it? The goal is to create this fully AI-driven adaptive manufacturing, not site, but sites. And they're going to start with Erlanger in Germany. And the idea is to really have an AI brain that continuously analyzes the plant's digital twin. It tests the processes or the process improvements virtually, okay? Then it validates them, and then it translates those insights into changes on the shop floor. So this isn't just a smarter technology, it is a fundamentally new operating model.
Alexandra.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Naida, for your thoughts as well. It's really interesting.
It's scary.
Yeah. So a concrete example from my side. So since about a decade, we've been working on this new concept, which I affectionately and maybe somewhat controversially call digital supply chain surveillance. And the idea is to gather and predict information on your supply chain without having to rely on the willingness of your partners to share information and their incentives. So this could include things like predicting domestic, international dependencies, inferring illegal practice, for example, sales to sanctioned companies, deforestation, causing practices, inferring capacity, and even inferring kind of effective prices for negotiations. So that idea led to various different startups and has become a not the answer, but a very useful tool for dealing with things like geopolitical volatility, for example. So we are seeing a big increase in the adoption of these types of digital surveillance and inference tools for supply chains. And we can now ask questions like who would be impacted by, I don't know, a cybersecurity attack for this company, or even policy questions like how deep, how many tiers deep you need to check your supply chain to make sure there is no forced labor in the supply chain and things like that. So I feel like advancements in AI, they were instrumental really to operationalizing this concept because it allows us to extract and process information at a scale that we couldn't possibly manually do before. But of course, AI has many issues and challenges as well. It's not the sole answer to these questions, but it's a great enabler, which we'll talk about later, I guess.
Yeah. So, Matthias.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. And hello. So I'm equally excited about AI. Unsurprisingly, it's a very versatile tool that has entered our toolbox. And of course, maybe 10 years ago, we used it very well for very specific applications like quality control or predictive maintenance. And now, of course, we have seen LLMs that give us reasoning models, which provide the front end for agentic workflows. And given that a lot of what we do and have to decide in operations is repetitive, especially when we talk about supply chain decisions, ordering, vehicle routing, inventory levels, and the like, actually operations lends itself very well to adopting agentic workflows. The one point I would like everyone to remind, though, of course, is Amara's law, right? We tend to overestimate the impact of technology in the short term. So there is a lot of hype. However, I also think Amara was right in saying that we are yet to fully understand what it will do for us in the long term. And I do suspect that a lot of processes that we now think would become agentic, we will not even think about, ever not having been agentic in future. And yeah, we're yet to see what else it can do for us. The journey has certainly been quite a roller coaster ride. And lastly, I do share the great need and would like to phrase this as a call to OM community. It will come to us to make these processes safe, right? So that's when you mentioned guardrails. So I think that's where operations has a lot to add to AI, not just AI to OM, so to speak. Thanks.
And Netran, sure.
Thank you so
please.
much. Oh, I'm equally excited about the opportunities, but and I did plan to actually talk then very warmly now as well at the start of AI. But since everybody else did that, I think I'd also like to mention that although we've had AI for very practical tasks in manufacturing, for example, which is my domain for years, the adoption rate is still very low. Also in advanced countries like Switzerland, we did a survey, a stratified randomized survey a couple of years back. And if you look at, AI implementations in manufacturing and supply chain, I'm not talking about the Gen AI wave, the numbers are very, very, very low. So 2% have done that at scale 2 years ago. If you count Gen AI in the office, of course, the numbers are much higher. So I'd like to put that on out in the room as well. The opportunities are absolutely amazing. Adoption rates, for some reason, are lagging a little bit behind.
And if
Maybe
I may add, its cost.
Costs, skills. There are many reasons.
Skills, I think.
Overpromise and all of those things as well. I agree with Matthias. Root cause analysis, visual quality inspections, those solutions are already here. Companies can make use of them. Still, something is holding them a little bit back. What I think we will see very, very soon come in, and that is all type of co-pilots in the factory floor, in supply chain functions. It relates to what Nara was talking about, what Siemens is trying to build. And then finally, what's on the horizon? And there's where I'm very excited about the work coming out of Alexandra's lab, is the AI agents in supply chains. That for me is a little bit more futuristic still, but there's interesting things to discuss.
So just an advice to the audience online, if you have some question, please, you can write this question by also adding your name and organization. Thanks. So now let's move on the AI and operational excellence aspect. And in particular, you provide some very great and concrete examples about the AI adoption. But the first question I want to put to all of you is, should we redefine operational excellence in an AI-enabled world, or it's just the generic use of AI? So we can start already with Nada.
Okay, all right, thank you. So I think operational excellence does need to be redefined a little bit. It obviously not abandoned the core aims that we strive for, right? Reliability, quality, efficiency, service, value creation for customers. That's what we're about. It doesn't fundamentally change. But I think what fundamentally should change and that we all need to work on is how that excellence is achieved and how it's measured. So in the past, what did we do? Well, operational excellence was, we measured it as standardization, control, lean processes, continuous improvement. I was very much a part of that. And how was it driven? Well, it was largely driven by human observation and periodic review. I think now in this AI-enabled world that we have to add to it adaptability, prediction, ability to make better decisions in real time. So it's no longer just about having a stable process and doing it well, but it's about sensing change early. That's where the forecasting piece really comes in, responding intelligently. And that's where AI really comes in. So it's no longer just responding, but really much more surgically, and then learning continuously. So I think it fundamentally changes and we add dimensions in terms of operational excellence.
And what do you think, Alessandra?
So a lot of the points, I guess, are in concurrence with what Neda has just said. I feel like fundamental definitions of operational excellence and organizational KPIs aren't really changing. There's a very big maybe on some KPIs such as productivity that might be fulfilled a little bit better through the use of automation, but we will need to sit tight and wait to see what will happen there. What I feel like that might be needed is some maybe perhaps additional KPIs on how organizations de-risk the use of AI. We had these chief information officers, in the last decade who were responsible for efficient capture of data, cybersecurity, and their roles now are evolving and somewhat merging with chief technical officers in some way, because they need to be increasingly held accountable for AI governance, ensuring that models are ethical, they are transparent, they're free from bias. But also they need to think about, developing new digital products within and across the workspace, as well as customer-facing digital products. So I guess these new KPIs might come into place, and they might be adopted by organizations. And again, building on Neda, I guess one of the things we'll need to think about in the near future when we have these co-pilots, working with us, is creativity as well. Say, are we just, sometimes the KPI itself, is it just speed that we are looking for from a co-pilot setup, or is it also increased creativity, which is, something that we probably need to look into.
And what do you think, Matthias?
Yeah, right. Let me be a bit controversial. I think operations excellence doesn't change at all, right? Because it is, after all, the idea of creating something that adds value to the customer. So therefore, those metrics as to what constitutes value doesn't change. What does change, and it came through already, is that AI adds new capabilities, particularly with regards to customization, right? I mean, it's now possible to use AI to extract preferences, so to elucidate preferences from user behavior, for example, and therefore customize the offering. So therefore, I think what does change is sort of the fundamental offerings. If you think about the product process matrix or the service process matrix, the top right-hand corner, that boundary is very fuzzy now, and AI keeps pushing it out. So I think AI gives us new capabilities, but it doesn't fundamentally change what we're trying to achieve with operational excellence. What will change, and again, just to reiterate what's been said before, is how we teach operational excellence and what skills we need to give our students and managers that we educate.
Yeah. And you, Tor?
Yeah, so what is it to add after this? I think we all seem actually quite aligned. We have theories even to explain what's going on. Theory of performance frontier explains us that when the technological frontier shifts outward, yeah, we get new capabilities, as Matthias and everybody else is saying on this call. So sure, how we can achieve operational excellence or how excellent we can be is shifting. That is changing. The core principles of quality, safety, speed, all of these things, flexibility, and maybe a few others get more weight, will remain. And that is important to understand that the worst thing we do now is to throw OpEx overboard and go all in on AI. Maybe to add something as well, I think one part of OpEx will become more, not less important, and that is the soft issues, the leadership and the people skills. Alexandra already talked about a little bit the risk of, we'll probably come back to later, AI over-reliance. What happens when people talk with chatbots instead of colleagues and stuff. So maybe finally we can get some more emphasis on the soft aspects of OpEx.
Okay, so now we have more than 100 views, so it's a great webinar, I think, timely topic. So I want to thank the people who are here now, the audience from University of Exeter, HEC Montreal, University of Rome, Freiburg, Bombay, India, Sydney. So thank you guys to be here now. So now that you have worked a lot on forecasting, and probably now forecasting is one of the area where AI has generated some of most documented empirical results. In your opinion, how is AI changing forecasting and planning, and what does it mean for classic trade-off like efficiency versus responsiveness?
Thank you for asking. And before I answer that, I just wanted to underscore what Tor had said, that we really are aligned, and the softer issues, we have to be really cognizant. And I think in OPEX really worry about that domain knowledge. And I think this is coming from a panel that is very quantitatively rooted, but we are seeing this because a lot of these cognitive skills will erode or can erode, and that does impact forecasting and planning as well. So I think as far as AI's impact in terms of forecasting and planning, I think I see a number of things, but we're really moving from this periodic, really largely static exercises in these decision-driven processes. And I know I wrote about this back in the day, but the old model, companies would produce a forecast, they would build around it, then they waited for the next cycle. So this was in cycles. We are moving with AI to always on operations. And that really changes things. So in the new model, AI can absorb in real time so much more of the signal in real time, changes in demand, in weather, in promotions, supplier delays, and then update that in the planning picture again dynamically. So we're moving from static to a very dynamic process. So forecasting becomes less about any one single number and more about improving quality and speed. But again, quality goes with speed, and I think it's really important to remember that. I believe that this was actually mentioned by Matthias, is that we can have speed, but we can erode quality, and that is a really, really big deal. All environments are not created equal. All decisions are not created equal, and certain environments are extremely critical, and there is no room for error. Think about medical, think about pharma development. And so we really need this interplay of the two. But I know in the past, when it came to when we talked about efficiency versus responsiveness. What did we look for? Well, more capacity, more inventory, more slack. And I think now we are needing to be much more precise and have the capability to be much more precise and targeted. Where specifically is demand shifting? When we say demand, well, where? We can really micro segment this in very specific ways now in real time and measure risk, assess risk. And that, I think, is one of the areas that is absolutely going to be critical, or is critical for us collectively, everybody listening, is better risk assessment with AI. And one of the old tools in the forecasting toolbox, if you will, is scenario planning. So that is one of the things I've actually been working with companies, and I think the two really go hand in hand. We have to build agile, responsive supply chains, do really good risk assessment, and then do scenario planning in real time as AI is able to respond to the signals better than we ever have in the past, updating this continuously. So again, AI doesn't replace planning. It just basically does this now in terms of this continuous management process. And the two go hand in hand.
Okay, Matthias, is AI improving operational discipline or creating more variability and complexity in your opinion?
Yeah, great question. Both, right? On the one hand, as that already said, right, multimodal AI systems are very able to deal with multiple types of data and making sense of them, right? To a neural network, everything essentially becomes a parameter, and it doesn't matter whether you put in written language or measured variables. So therefore, I think its ability to deal with complexity is greater. So it helps us make sense of what's happening. Equally, of course, it does also create a lot of variability by being able to customize and by being able to be faster. So it creates both static and dynamic complexity, if you wish. And that's where I think the economics of it will be very interesting, right? Yes, a lot of things will become possible, but to Thor's point earlier, right, the adoption rates are low because I think very often the economic case, the ROI, isn't given, right? Or organizations find it's not quite so obvious to actually offer this kind of service. So I think we should be careful to always bear in mind what's technically feasible also needs to be economically viable. And therefore, I think this world of where AI would customize everything and anything is not one we would like to see in operations, and B, one that I think customers will not be able to pay for or not be willing to pay for, right? So in that sense, being specific where the variety or variability generated through customization really adds value, I think will be key from my point of view.
Okay. And Alexandra, you work in supply chain and in particular on moving from reactive to proactive supply chain. So in your opinion, can artificial intelligence and operational excellence help organization move from reactive to proactive operations across the whole supply network?
Yeah, definitely it can help. It can also create additional uncertainty and risk. But just thinking about what Nadia said earlier, that was kind of going to be my concrete example.
Okay.
So one of those examples we have been working on before is predicting delays, and then trying to incorporate that prediction into planning. So up until about 2018-ish, we have been largely treating delays as something that just happened to us, really, and not something that was forecastable in a data-driven way. So we now realize that actually AI algorithms can help us predict delays. I'm talking about minor delays here. Nobody can predict Trump and their tariff imposition, for example, but provided there is sufficient data available in historical records, then we can see order delivery windows, for example, with certain confidence levels, and then we could incorporate that into production planning processes. Another example could be early warning signals. So again, thinking about Nadia's earlier point, we are working on systems where we could think about obtaining high-level metadata from supply chain partners, and then look at open data sets to look for these early warning signals for potential demand side and supply side disruptions. And then such signals can then be used to plan for disruptions earlier than, say, until the disruption reaches a dyadic connection already. So technically, definitely, we are moving to a world where we are a bit more proactive, but we should also. I'm just echoing also what Matthias said earlier about increased complexity and coupling in the system, and perhaps propagations of uncertainties, because the more we predict, the more decision points we incorporate into our planning system, the more uncertain it becomes as well. So that balance needs to be struck.
Okay, and Tor, so you have some, I think, concrete example on the AI application in manufacturing. So in your opinion, how do AI-driven improvements compare to traditional continuous improvements initiatives? So which are the main differences?
Oh, okay, thank you. AI is unlocking a complete new pool of capabilities for continuous improvement initiatives. And since you ask for a concrete example, and I'm based in Switzerland, I think I need to talk about chocolate. So, we have the best chocolate in the world. Apologies to anybody from Belgium on the call. And or some of the best chocolate companies, of course. And one of them is Linton Sprüngli, known for example, these chocolate balls and many other things. And on one of his production line, they will produce 1 million a day, more than 1 million a day. And this is very good company. I've been working to, of course, improve yield or reduce yield loss for years. And to your question, so how would you kind of approach a problem like that? Well, they look to lean first. So they launched a global total productivity maintenance program, as you very often do in process industries and food, food and beverage industries, and that improved yield by quite a bit, but not to 100%. And why? Because it relates partly to the question you asked to Matthias about variability. And we know, again, from our theories, we'd like to drive variability out of the system and maybe add strategic variability. But when you produce one product and you'd like to produce them in big volume, you'd like to drive variability out. And if you have integrated production systems working with products from Mother Earth, you have natural variation. And you can do as much fishbone analysis as you'd like. Go 5Y method, you can do all day long. You can even do statistical process control on the machine. You will never get yield to 100%. And the reason is simple. There are nonlinear relationships in production systems like this. It goes through many machines. It's very, very complex. Humankind, before AI, had no chance in controlling those type of variables and parameters. But that's exactly where AI excels and neural networks. So if you are able to capture data points from your production system, be it a machine, but in this case, many machines integrated, you can feed that to an algorithm and try to optimize that towards yield in this case. And AI can just take you much further than you could do, as I said, with the classic lean methods. So this is an example where AI actually is outperforming anything we did in the past with our more simplistic but useful lean tools.
And so, which are the main risks in overestimating the impact that AI can have in operational excellence, in your opinion, Tor?
Well, one of the risks, of course, is that we get over-reliant on it, but that's not really a problem in a production system like this, because you can turn it on and off. Maybe that's much more of a problem in the Gen AI space, which is indeed hallucinating. We often like to separate analytical AI, which is more the classic AI models, and Gen AI. And I think that distinction is important in manufacturing. I'm talking mostly about manufacturing. My colleagues talk more about, to some extent, supply chains. These things are, of course, related. At some point, you can take the manufacturing model and just add suppliers, vendors, customers, and you get a more of a holistic model. But what I think is, the models with the probably the biggest potential in manufacturing is analytical AI models, models that don't hallucinate, models that you can explain with other models. So maybe one of the bigger risks is more on the Gen AI space, and maybe we talk more about that later.
Okay, yeah. And Alexandra, which are the main risks in implementing AI in supply chains? So, concretely, there are some risks for the supply networks, and in which way we can limit these risks?
Right. Okay, so there are, I mean, as Torbjörn mentioned, so AI isn't a monolithic. We have different types of AI, and they have different types of risks. So I think with Gen AI, as we have said, we have these hallucination issues, especially, and it will kind of start seeping into agentic workflows that rely on LLMs to a certain extent. We are incorporating uncertainties in the tasking of an agent that is actually giving us a means to automate certain processes. So just think about the interaction between a principal and an agent, right? So if I am actually using natural language, there is vagueness involved in human language, and that will translate into the AI's workflow. And then AI itself, even if we incorporate analytical AI tools, as Torbjörn said, into the agent to undertake certain tasks, to do safe, to guardrail it and kind of put a guardrail around this agent, we still are exposing ourselves to many of the issues that Gen AI suffers from at the moment, although it's really powerful and it's really tempting to use them. I feel like some of the main risks are going to come from there. And the second risk will be complexity, because we essentially will be incorporating AI into various different business functions, and also across business functions, and even AI perhaps between different organizations and their interactions. So the more we incorporate AI at different levels of the process, and perhaps even hide it behind something that looks like is not AI, then the more difficult it might become to trace issues and debug the system. And then kind of there's also qualitative issues that we need to think about apart from the technology, which is accountability, governance of AI, and loss of creativity in solution finding, which many researchers have started looking at, although we are lagging a little bit behind in the operations management community in that front. But again, accountability and lack of creative solution finding, I think, will be those qualitative risks that arise.
Okay, thank you. And Nada, what risks arise when AI replaces human operational decision making? Which are the main risks?
Replacing humans with algorithms and with AI. So obviously the risk that was mentioned is we know that AI makes mistakes, hallucinates. That's a very obvious risk. But I think that deeper risks that go hand in hand, for example, I think that handing over judgment, for example, too quickly, especially in environments that are dynamic, that are ethically consequential. So there's a very nuanced conversation here, because AI risks and risks in general are very context dependent, and they need to be managed continuously, rather than just simply assumed away by technical performance that we talked about, measuring speed and accuracy in this sort of historical way without really looking at consequences in really much more targeted way. So I think, and there's a couple of things that I really want to mention that I think are important. So yes, first you get speed without potentially understanding. And I think so you can optimize for targets that it was given, and I've seen this a lot of times, but it misses the wider context, that strategic nuance, whether it's interaction with the customer, or some weak signals that aren't showing up, and I see that a fair amount. But second, you risk automating bias, which is really a big deal. So once people start trusting the system too much, they stop challenging it. And even when it's wrong, and this is actually, I personally am seeing as a big risk. I think Tor had kind of alluded to this a little bit. And what is a real concern is that we need people, talent with expertise that have domain knowledge, that know how to call out exceptions. What I am seeing is a couple of things as AI is getting better, especially Gen AI, that is sycophantic and affirming and all of it. I'm seeing more and more cognitive surrender. That cognitive surrender where we don't check it anymore, but we give up our autonomy. It makes life easier. We just keep moving on. But the other thing too, so what I'm seeing is that the cognitive knowledge and processes that people have, the sharpness that you and I and people, that slowly diminishes. I am not an expert in human cognitive capabilities, but I'm learning. I mean, I am trying to grow and really begin to understand deeper and deeper this human AI interaction and how humans do not lose this particular knowledge. Bearing in mind, too, that AI has a very jagged intelligence, and we know that that's been proven. It is so brilliant in certain areas, and it is actually really can be very dumb in very surprising ways and unexpected ways. So I think there's a real danger in this. So if we just blindly implement it, you end up potentially having really what I call brittle operations. They're brittle because some areas are absolutely amazing, and then other areas really aren't, can suddenly not perform well at all. And the last thing, and I'll stop, I could talk for a long time about this, is who is responsible? And I think Alexandra mentioned this really well. At the end of the day, there are legal systems, there are contracts, when you talk about operations. So who is responsible and who signs off on this? And this is really very much a big deal in terms of how this is designed and done.
So thank you. And Matthias, how should firms align AI and OpEx initiatives with operation strategies?
Yeah, great question. It reminds me a bit of the famous old joke, right? That you, in order to create chaos, you should always launch new transformation initiatives at a speed strictly greater than the organization's ability to implement them, right? And that sort of seems a bit like the case here too, is that, here we are, yet another transformation wave, which I think we don't need. Mostly because AI is a new technology. It's not something that fundamentally changes, what the business does, but it certainly can help. But it's one of many. So therefore, I would not see the need to have an AI specific digital transformation, or to make any distinction between, let's say, digital twin, which I think Neda you mentioned, which I'm also a great fan of, or other digital technologies such as sensing or the like. So in that sense, treating it as different, I don't think is helpful because it confuses more than it helps. And ultimately, in my mind, the strategy stands, at the top and decides, right? Good old Hoshin process, right? Whereby you decide what you want to achieve and then work out how AI can support you. So I'm not a big fan of chief AI officers alongside CIOs. I've seen this create more confusion than being helpful. And I think AI should be given the importance it deserves as an enabling technology that adds capabilities and not as a means, sort of not an end in itself. It's a means to an end.
I'll comment on that, but it's very interesting. I fully agree with what it should be, but it doesn't. That's not exactly how the landscape look like in companies. You don't see very practical differences, like the lean guys. That's the old zealots with pen and paper and going around and running their workshops, and they have a lot of good and learnings to bring along. The AI is not driven by them. It's driven by computer scientists coming straight out of school, maybe somebody in IT that thinks that now it's our turn. These are a completely different group of people in age and education. So they very often live indeed in parallel in companies. Um, so I fully agree that ideally we'd like to see an integrated approach to operational excellence or AI plus lean, all of that stuff. But in practice, I rarely see that. I see
Yeah.
two units fighting for resources. One is hot and new, and the other one is old and trying to stay modern.
Yeah.
And those that are able to do so are those that are able to bridge over to this new domain.
Yeah, and I think one point to add, right, is if you just imagine you're a chief operating officer at this point in time, and you may be, all your training predates the world of machine learning, and now you're being bombarded with all this sort of coverage in the press about agentic, and your CEO comes to you or your board comes and says, "Why aren't you?" Right? So I think the pressure must be enormous at the moment. I think that also plays into this. And then, of course, to your point, they go out and hire the young blood that can do this, and they live indeed in a parallel world. They've never been to a factory very often, right? Have no interest in doing it. They don't understand the context. And then the challenge is, how do you bridge those that understand what actually happens in operations with those that can do something with the data it produces? And that's, I think, where the gap sits, right?
And if I may, what was said, Matthias Tor, is brilliant and true completely, because we're seeing the siloed worlds. And Tor, you had mentioned in terms of the old guard not maybe understanding the tools. One of the things that does personally, in what I'm seeing, also really frustrate me is that the new guard, Matthias, that you're bringing in, they don't have the domain knowledge. They don't have the expertise. So it's not just understanding the tools, but it's being able to bridge it and also respect the tools and what the domain is. And in many ways, Matthias, you had earlier said how so many things really are not changing. What is operational excellence? What does it mean for a company? One of the things I find so frustrating is that everybody's talking about, well, how do I use AI? Use AI. Nobody talks about it within the domain, and that you need domain-specific knowledge, because otherwise you end up with slop, and you don't know what to query and how to query it and use it if you really don't understand your business. I would like to see, and I am seeing, companies that keep the old guard around, that keep people that understand the business and have a path for their junior people to learn the expertise of the business itself, not just the technology.
One funny anecdote on this: a lot of the old guard, as you described them, are now complaining that their juniors are producing documents for them to review and assess at much greater speed, half of which is slop and therefore, of course, created easily. And suddenly you're blocking, the most valuable resource with, having to review and validate knowledge that has been created using Gen AI without the context knowledge, right? So, there certainly is a lot that remains to be learned. how we integrate AI, as well as how we build the right skills across all levels. Because the last thing you want is your chief operating officer to review ChatGPT generated reports day in, day out.
And I'm thinking in terms of the amount of time, the hours, and the dollar signs as they review slop after slop after slop. That's a great example.
Yeah.
May I just one last maybe comment on this? I feel like we're in a transition period because the new generation is going to grow up at that intersection between the kind of AI world and your more older school ways of doing things. So I think we will get there, and I wholeheartedly agree about we need to have this kind of hybrid knowledge really about how does AI actually work, but also what is the domain knowledge, and that is what is proving really tricky, and it's creating lots of pitfalls with these silos when the computer science team at the organization creates this prediction algorithm that doesn't make any sense whatsoever to the operations group because they can't explain it and it's just spewing out nonsense. But I think we will get there, and one more thing I would perhaps interject is that again AI isn't a monolith. So hopefully there won't be one guy who is just thrown all the AI work at and he has to think about both LLMs and a Bayesian prediction engine, reinforcement learning agent, and so on. So because this is a very, very hard to map and domain, it's not easy to kind of navigate, and also I somewhat perhaps slightly and respectfully disagree with AI being just another enabler, like I don't know, an Excel sheet, right? Because AI does have risk. It has risk in terms of safeguarding bias. It has risks in terms of accountability, and even thinking about those lack of cognitive capability, diminishing cognitive capability, and so on. So I think there needs to be some roles in the organization that at least keeps an eye and monitors these sorts of things. We don't know how it will emerge and what the organizational chart will emerge in terms of AI, but it will emerge at some point, hopefully.
We got several questions from the audience, so we have more than 150 views for now. So thank you for all of you which are connected, and open to who want to respond to these several questions. In particular, several of them about AI, if AI will be able to identify the root causes and propose solutions and take the control of operational excellence, and we still need the human touch for improvement or not. So,
okay,
I'll be happy to
start.
let Matthias start. Go ahead, Matthias.
So, I mean, AI can do whatever it has seen before, right? So, the minute you have sufficient training data that allows you to extract patterns to make a prediction about the current situation, you're good. And so, for the most part, I think it's very useful for the ideation phase in any improvement. It can also help with the root cause analysis. But it's not a substitute for observation, right, for Gemba in that sense. And it will fall short when there's not enough data present. So to give you an example, a recent case, trying to use AI in the quality control of battery production for EVs, where, yes, you can have the cameras on the batteries and see how they're being produced. But unless you have enough pictures of faults, as in defects, you can't train the AI well enough to spot defects, right? So therefore, technically, it's more than possible to use quality control using CNNs and image recognition technology, but unless you have the good data to train it well, it will not produce good outcomes. So in that sense, I think very useful, but not a full substitute for observation and Gemba. And so therefore, it's an augmentation and not a substitute. But Tor, see what you say.
Yeah, a little bit of agreement, a little bit of disagreement, maybe. For the battery case, the thing is, of course, there's many things. Visual control is one thing. If that's just that what we talk about, it's possible to train models on only good pictures and look for anomalies. We can do that, but of course, there are other things in the battery that it's just we don't have data for them. It's just like if you want to control or observe the heart of a human, you're not gonna rip the body apart to look at the heart. You look at other things like pulse and proxies, right? So that's a problem that exists. But I was thinking about the question seems to be, do we move towards autonomous process control, and what's the role of the human? And there, I fully agree with Matthias. Autonomous process control is a holy grail. That's what people talk about. That's the Industry 4 lights out vision. And if you can move towards that, you would like to try to do that. In that process, however, at least what we've seen, for example, in the chocolate case, is that you don't have all the data. You don't have a full picture. You don't have this vision of a complete digital twin. We're just not there yet. So in that process, you will always have a human in the loop, and you inform the human of what to do. When you get more data, you can do more. When you have more complete picture, you can do more, and you can close the loop. But what's happening in manufacturing then is that somebody comes up with a new chocolate design, or the taste change, or so you have these changes that are always introduced in your production system, kind of gravitating you back again towards a more augmenting technology type solution than the full automation.
That Dubai chocolate you're mentioning.
Sorry?
Dubai chocolate? What they have passed on.
Dubai chocolate. Yeah, well, probably you produce that on a different line than the chocolate balls, but yeah, that's right. I saw Lint has some new innovation now, so you should all try that then.
Well, I'll just say this much, Tor, Lindt is the only chocolate I eat, and I am just like the biggest fan. So it's almost like I just want to just come out and see the factory so I can just get the chocolate. So, but what I wanted to say was that I agree with very much with what has been said. And I think Matthias started with saying AI only knows what it has seen. And that is precisely true. What it has seen, whether visually, whether in other forms, but it has to have something. And what I've been doing for really quite a few years now is field research, and I'm interviewing executives every year and just really keeping this longitudinal picture. And one of the things that was said to me, and I could say the name because I have permission, was John Sicard, who was at the time CEO of Kinaxis, and it was in 2023, so it was post-COVID. And I remember him saying to me, once COVID hit, all math-based models collapsed. And he clarified, said, this is not an indictment of the science and math. It's not an indictment. It is simply that it doesn't know, right? The parameters had changed. So AI has to know these external events, these black swans. One of the problems is that we are, I think, living in a time where we have tons of black swans that are having this simultaneous impact on enterprises and operations. That is, if you look at geopolitics, I mean, just how can you run a business with all the tariffs and all the things with oil? I don't even want to go into that. And then, of course, you go into various climate-related issues and policy issues. And these are all colliding. We have this collision, and there's a lot of events that AI simply doesn't know. And this is where humans really have to intervene, overlay, and they have to know the business.
May I just add one more thing onto what you just said, Neda, because that's so interesting. I think we should also be mindful that, of course, machine learning as we know it looks for correlations, right, at a hyperscale, and not for causations. And if we are taking actions in response to predictions that change the data itself, then we are going to make wrong conclusions with machine learning. And that's akin to a farmer watching the weather forecast and then seeing that there's going to be a drought and then watering the field. And then any machine learning algorithm that looks at weather patterns, correlates that with water content on the field, will say, oh, when there is drought, the water is fine. And you can extend that argument to actions that we take that change the data. For example, watching the news, a procurement officer watching the news and then taking an action to kind of buy inventory in advance and so on. So there are certain machine learning algorithms or communities as well who are trying to build new ways of approaching to these types of problems. Such as causal machine learning, for example, double machine learning. So, and those are starting to be able to deal with those sorts of problems where we haven't seen that type of data before. So we try counterfactuals and so on. So that's something to bear in mind as well.
I haven't drank the Kool-Aid on causal AI yet. Sorry.
It's tricky, but it's nice. It's very interesting.
I think it's an interesting concept, a bit beyond our reach, at least with current architectures. That would be a great debate to have, actually.
Yeah.
And another interesting aspect raised by Elliot Bendoli from Ohio State University is the ethical barriers of AI. So,
I can take that. That's bread and butter, right? So, or social norms and values, right? So when we talk about ethical AI, we are talking about AI systems that violate our social norms and values. And our social norms and values tend to, precede legislators' action by at least 10 years, right? So think about the social media ban currently, being mooted by many countries on the back of the algorithmic design of recommender systems used by the social media platforms. So what this means is it will fall down to organizations adopting AI to make sure that they set out the values against which the AI systems must be judged. And this always sounds very soft and fuzzy, but it's not, because if you say you want to be inclusive, what this means is that your data science team is going to turn around and say, okay, fine, then tell me which variables and what threshold. So it suddenly turns this concept of fluffy ethics into very hard metrics. And a good example is the US and the Equal Employment Opportunities Act, right? That specifies that you need to ensure that the disadvantaged group has an equal treatment of at least 80% of that of the privileged group. So, here you have the criterion, in this case, ethnic origin or gender, and then you have the threshold of 80%. So in that sense, ethical AI is ultimately a statement of your values that then turn into parameters and thresholds that you define against which your model gets assessed and is monitored. So it's a very practical thing, actually, but unfortunately, the discussion very often sort of draws ethics into the sort of tree-hugging world where it really shouldn't be.
Yeah, and I also wanted to add how context dependent it is. So some of my work recently has actually been in healthcare and working with a team at University of Chicago on allocation of scarce resources. And this is where ethics, the model simply cannot capture everything, and the ethical issues become so important, and so many of our historical standards that we may have had coded in do not embrace the full spectrum of the kinds of needs that might come into play. So it's extremely important area. And I think we, and I do it too, right, where we just have this one answer, but it really depends. And some environments are extremely vulnerable, and it becomes a very critical issue. And I think the medical area is definitely one of it.
Yeah, access to education, right?
Absolutely.
Who gets the job interview, right? So what about biometric surveillance at work, right? Emotional recognition. Wouldn't you like to use AI to monitor your supplier in a negotiation to work out how truthful they respond? All possible, but of course, ethically more than questionable. So yeah, context, I think, is key. Absolutely agree.
What's your opinion, Alexandra?
Yes. So I agree completely that context is very important there, and the severity of the ethical violation is going to be determined by the context. And again, kind of going back to, I guess, AI governance, there is the policy that is mandated, but then there is the organizational adoption of that policy. And the ways in which that's going to be implemented. So I think, again, we are in the transition period at the moment where, it's already very hard, as we spoke about, to find skill sets that in one person converges into both understanding the business domain and also what the AI algorithms are doing, and then kind of governing that, and putting in place appropriate whistleblowing mechanisms and so on under business pressure. Again, we spoke about adoption is a contested thing at the moment that's being highly pressurized. So it's a very fast moving world there. So it is hard, is all I can say, but it needs to be done, and we will see how things emerge.
And you, Tor?
Not necessarily anything to add to this, to the other speakers. But of course, what we observe is that it does create or add to the inertia that the organizations have in terms of AI. And I think at least as professors, we should be very happy for this inertia, because it makes it possible to follow suit. And by that, some kudos maybe is deserved for our colleagues in computer science who needs to read more papers than we do, to put it that way, to keep on top of their domain developing.
And final question. In your opinion, what are the main limitations of the current literature in the AI in OpEx? And what could be some future opportunities? So we can start from Nada. Yeah.
Thank you. And I actually think that we've alluded to so many of this. So I think in many ways it is moving very quickly, but I think it is very uneven in terms of its coverage. So one of the things I think that it is maybe heavily weighted towards technology adoption, and then the performance gains, like better forecasting, lower downtime, improved quality, faster decisions. And I think maybe giving less attention, the kinds of things that was asked, the ethical issue, the ethics, the work design. I am actually digging out now I'm being funny here, but digging out our old process planning, because process mapping, process workflow, the kind of thing that we had done in Lean for years, is so critical right now in order to be able to really decide where to implement AI within the process, how to keep, we all know theory of constraints and know how that all kind of flows. So work design, authority, accountability, we had already mentioned that, continuous improvement. So I am not seeing it evenly distributed. The other thing that I am doing more of is really doing field research and field work, in order to be able to kind of keep up and measure the longitudinal changes that are going on.
And for you, Alexandra?
Yeah, so I think as Nada said, we have covered quite a lot that should point to research directions for the community. I think a lot of it will come from issues like explainability, accountability, and governance. I'm also, expecting, as Matthias and as Torbjörn has said, agentic becoming a big topic, and the complexity that it's both the challenges that it brings in terms of in terms of complex interactions between functions and tools and within the organization, across organizations, that we will see interactions of so that kind of both will result in increased opportunity to overcome local optima, but it will also result in risk of disruption cascades, and perhaps will we see a flash crash in the supply chain as we are automating various functions that with agents that become reactive to changes in the ecosystem, for example. So those are, I think, interesting things to look at. But also looking at, as I said, diminishing of cognitive capability, human AI collaboration at different operational functions will become quite important to look at. And I guess a final perhaps thought there is our traditional kind of venues for publishing literature. They are struggling, I think, with this type of convergence between computer science and operations. And again, perhaps that's a transitionary thing with new generation researchers having to deal with this a lot faster, perhaps, as the field moves on. But yeah, at the moment, it's kind of hard to see where it will go in terms of literature.
And what about AI agents? Since I know you published a paper with Tor on AI agents in supply chain, so I also read it. It's amazing work, so congratulations. What will the future of AI agents? Since I think they are evolving very, very fast. So
maybe I'll defer to Tor there. What do you think, Tor?
Oh, the supply chain thing I'll leave to you, but I'll be happy to see AI agents are already here if we look at, what simple tasks they do. So, for example, if I take the chocolate example, there wouldn't be any problem having a solution there today where a manager comes to work, opens the door, turn on the computer and say, hey, boss, on line XYZ, there was a problem. I suggest we do it like this. In fact, I actually already did because of the decisions you made in the past. We think that's right. To do a simple task like this, almost automated process control or control bot for offices, right? Robotic process control. So that's already here. But what Alexandra is talking about, or what we've done in that paper, is more agents on the supply chain level. That is a modeling paper, right? So there's nothing implemented in any context in that paper. It's a trial. I think that's a few years out. That's my opinion.
Well, there's this funny example, right? Was it at Carnegie Mellon where they created an entire organization just purely with agents, and the agents were talking to each other, and suddenly it turned all very dysfunctional, and they were just exchanging nonsense messages. And one of the commentaries said, well, sounds remarkably human, doesn't it?
One thing I will add there, Matthias, is yes, I've been hearing of, and I don't know if it's true, but there are a few initiatives now with companies like SAP, Google, Microsoft, thinking about creating these interoperable agents that can talk across organizations. So while yes, there is quite a bit of work to be done before everybody jumps in the bandwagon, and that would be a very scary place indeed. There is certainly some industrial push there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we have a bet at Site Business School amongst the faculty when we will see the first zero-employee unicorn. So the first company to reach $1 billion on not having a single employee, but lots of agents. And yeah, I've put this into the future quite a bit, but we'll see. I mean, we have so much to learn about, efficient guardrails, how to set the right privileges, how to have escalation points, right? It's not entirely clear how you would automate those, that a human then gets told something in your supply chain, right, is going wrong because an agent goes rogue and makes stupid ordering decisions based on whatever predictions made, right? And then also kill switches, because it's all nice and well to have a kill switch, but the kill switch is turning it off. But what people forget is you then need to have a backup to revert back to what it was before, right? So you implement an agent with a kill switch is great, but if you kill it and it doesn't revert back to a system that works, like a plan B, then certainly you've shafted yourself twice, right? So I think there's a lot to be learned about how to design and govern these agents, as powerful as they are. And I think we have a lot to learn. We should experiment. So I'm quite excited about companies using sandboxes to play with them, to experiment, to red team them, and then to implement them in small modular style, and then build up workflows that way. I think that's the way to go. Yeah.
And if I can add
Yeah.
to what Matthias had said, I think multiple times you said there's a lot to learn. And I think that is really important. I don't think that if we're going to contribute as academics, as industry leaders, we have to be aware that this is really exponential continuous learning on all our parts. None of us can sit back and say, well, I've been doing this. I'm an expert in my field. I know, what I know. This is it. It is continuous learning, and I think we all have to really embrace it and just grow. And it's a hard one, but we have to do it.
That's a great
guess
last word.
one
Sorry. We all have to learn and grow. I mean, I think that applies to the field, right?
Exactly.
Sorry, a great statement. Sorry.
No, I just wanted to add there onto that great point. I feel like we some of the developments, given the prevalence of human language now in talking to and tasking agents, is kind of holding a reflective mirror to ourselves as well. So when we are going to ask our agents to talk to our supplier, how aggressive we want our agents to be. We can actually now verbalize this. And do we want to verbalize it? So I feel like some of the some of those interactions and thought processes will hold a mirror to our actually unspoken practices as well.
Okay, we are almost at the end. We receive a lot of comments, and in particular, some great insight. This had helped me organize my thinking about the big AI implementation issues. So thanks. So I think we were able to investigate a lot of aspects related to AI in OpEx. I want to thank you all to be here today. For me, it was a great pleasure to moderate this section. And before closing the webinar, I want to remind for who is interested to join us during the POMS conference in Reno, and in particular the 7th of May at the Mini College of Operational Excellence. So thank you all to be here today, and hope to see you in POMS in Reno. So bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.